Okay, so last time we spoke about how to give our method some input, and I'm gonna start to use more real words now to describe what things are named in Java. I know it's going really fast, but this is also a supplemental, teaching for your school. So if you're already learning Java, these videos are made for you. Alright, so next thing I'm gonna do is we did input and we also did output. So we have return, and it's returning a string as a third word in this method is described to be. So let's maybe try and take a step back and say, now what is this field called? Now let's call this an accessifier, because it can be public, and I kinda briefly hinted that it could be also private. It can be more than that, but for now let's just stick to this very easy public and private. When we create a new class, and we talked about first class and second class, you will see what this accessifier means. Static is the second keyword indication here. Usually when you create, the other classes you have, you do not use the word static that much. So eventually we're gonna migrate away from doing what we're doing right now, having our methods and code inside the class where the program starts. The beautiful way of creating a class with where the program starts is that the main method here is not gonna do much more than actually just push the red on enable button, like start this program here and now. So, but this is next level thinking. So, but it never hurts just to tell already that what you really want to aim for is just having a class. Of course, first class is not a good name. It's just a name for us right now because we're learning this language. But eventually, you're gonna call this you can actually call it main just with the capitalized M, because in Java things are case sensitive, as you already noticed. Anyways, so we talked about input, and we also talked about this string here, and now we are beginning to understand that I haven't mentioned variables yet. So I think it's about time that we took a step back and said, okay, so we now we learned something. We have an idea how to create this method, and I've explained the different words here, and we know that the string here is something returning that goes back, and we talked about in the last video. But what about the actual variables that you can create in a programming language? So I'm gonna take a step back and basically remove this sentence here. We can keep the code below, because since the method here that's called main, where the program starts, is empty, it's not gonna run anything. So we have a variable type called string, and we can basically write string name like this and say Daniel. So basically we can just print it out, and if we run the program here, we're gonna get Daniel in the below. I have seen teachers spending ages explaining variables, and I think that is a flaw. So there are much more different variables. Now the string type variable, so it's like you say, so it's type name equal, what should we call the other side? Assignment, and then semicolon. So type is the string, name of the variable is, maybe I should give it another name here. Just call it temp for now. So we give a variable a name, and we equal, and then we assign this value. So it's called from the right to the left hand assignment. So what is on this side here is going to be put into this name of whatever. So it's temp. And of course we can do more but we cannot have the same name. It's going to say already exists. So the error code is variable temp is already defined in the scope. In the scope basically means inside this method. We could in this method have another string temp equal Daniel, just like before, because that is another scope. So this scope here, as we also talked about, as I put the cursor behind the curly brace here, it's going to highlight what is in between the two curly braces is a scope of the method called coffee machine. So this exists only inside this. I cannot call variable 1 2 3 outside here. That doesn't exist. So it's going to say cannot resolve. All right, so we can create another variable called temp2 and put that equal to Daniel2. That is not a problem at all, as long as we're just creating different names. Now, there are of course other type variables. So when you are going to store text in the programming language of Java, you're going to use the variable type of strings. So what if you're going to store, let's say, let's just keep one number. So you can create something called an int, and you give it a name like number 1 equal to 1 to 3, and you can print that out just as well as before, and basically you're gonna get the result 1 2 3 down here in the console. Alright, so now you're thinking about numbers. What about math? So sure, you can do any math operators, which they're called, after the variable here called number 1. You can say +1, for example. It's gonna print out 1 2 4, because that is what 1 2 3 plus 1 is equal to. You can do all kinds of math here. You can divide, division, multiplication, negative or minus, and then plus. And there are other math signs you can use, but for now this is fine, you know. Alright, so int is of course a variable type that's gonna be let me just see, I think I have it right here. So if you go to the website of Oracle and you look at the official documentation, you can see stuff like that there's a type called Byte, and it basically goes from negative 128 to a maximum of 127. And there's something called a short, and it goes from a negative 32,768 to a maximum 32,767. And the integer is going to negative, from negative 2 raised to the 31 to the power of 31 to the positive 2 raised to the power of 31 minus 1. So basically that is the maximum and minimum number. And there are other types of variables. I think we're going to talk about some of the other types as well. So as you can see, the int is also called the whole number. So you cannot have like decimal in this. This is not gonna work, like 0.1, not gonna work. So if you want to work with decimals, you're either gonna use float. Let me just make that as a comment. So it's gonna be float, it's gonna be double, or it's gonna be let me see, which one was it? I think float or double is really good enough for now. So you might ask, what is the difference between the float and the double? And let me just pull that in again. So we're gonna see here that the float is a 32-bit variable and the double is a 64-bit variable. It basically means that the precision is better on the double as opposed to float, which is less precise when you use double. It also tells you that here, right there actually, in the official documentation, this data type should never be used for precise values such as currency and so on and so on. Then they do talk about Java big math, big decimal, but this is not for now. We just focusing on getting you started with Java programming. So basically this gonna means that if you're gonna create a program someday that's gonna work with numbers and you need to be somewhat pretty precise. Now I'm not saying 100%, then it is better to use the double. So you could say double, if I can type, number 1 equal to blah 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 blah, and you can say double number 2 equal to and then eventually if you're gonna do like a print to the screen, you want to say number 2, subtract that from number 1, and let's just remove the one below here and move the comment up. You're gonna run that and you will get a number back here. However, since this number is pretty, it's not that long, so we can create it even longer. At some point you will lose some precision if you're going to use float, and at some point, but at a later point, you're going to lose some precision if you're going to use double. So this is really how it's going to go. It is not that important for most programmers to use this variable type they call big math, big decimal, but for you right now, basically just think that if you want to hold a really big and long and complex decimal number, the safest choice for you is double. If it doesn't really matter, just use float. Now, it sounds like that float is highly imprecise, and that is not true. It is just the way the documentation is describing its precision, and you need to be aware of that as a programmer. Alright, so we can also look at another variable type. It is called a Boolean variable, or the Boolean, but Boolean variable is like Boolean like that, and you give it a name, and remember it is type and name every time you have a variable. So the type is Boolean, the type is double, the type is int, the type is string, and the name is number 1, number 2, number 1 again, just spelled differently, and temp. Our Boolean variable can only hold 2 different values, which is going to be true or false. So let's go ahead and give our is this right or correct, sorry, like this, and this equal to true. True. And then basically you can give it true or false values. Now this is going to be used in your programs whenever you have some sort of switch going on. So it can either be on and off. You're going to create some school code at some point that the teacher's going to tell you, create a light bulb, in code, and then you're going to turn it on and off. This variable is going to be the one that's going to hold its value for being turned on and off, for example. So that is really the variable type you're going to need to learn, just to get started with Java. If you are reading on a university, you might need to go even further and look at the type of, I'm going to do that in comment, jar, long. You might even need to take a look at, Byte. I think we didn't do that. And there are some other, of course, types you can take a look at. But for this course, I'm gonna mainly aim for the academic profession education. So that is, I guess high school for Americans, but in Denmark it's gonna be, it's called AP, academic profession, also a basic class in computer science. So these variables we're gonna work with when we're gonna do some basic stuff and basic programming. So what I'm gonna do now is to in the next video we're gonna start creating some conditionals. So we're going to use the variable types. We're going to do something called if statements. So we're going to ask questions, and depending on what is inside a variable, if it's larger than 1 or less than 1 or larger than a certain number, or if your age is less than or equal to or larger than 21, so on. So we're going to make some choices in the code. We can make the code execute different blocks of code by asking questions, and we're going to do that by using something called conditionals, which is also if statements. So until next time, I'm going to say take care.